6 weeks off. I went quiet in July and August, really just to take some R&R and let the city breathe. And just as I was about to come back to the podcast, some of the biggest news in Ontario real estate history just recently dropped. So, you've all seen the headlines. $10 million missing. Regulators that were asleep at the wheel. But what most people didn't really explain was the basics, like what actually is a deposit and what is a trust account, and why does any of this really matter? And most importantly, how could something like this even happen? Because, this isn't just about numbers. It's about grifters. It's about loopholes and an industry that attracts too many people just chasing fast money. So stick with me, because if you've ever wondered how millions of dollars can vanish pretty much overnight from the very system that's meant to protect buyers and sellers, then stick with me, because in this episode, you'll want to hear the dirt on all of this. So here's what we're going to cover today. So we're going to cover what a trust account actually is and why every buyer and seller should care. Then we're going to talk about how millions can just vanish from what's supposed to be one of the most regulated vaults in real estate. And then we're going to talk about why we let grifters thrive in an industry handling multi-million-dollar transactions. Then, we have a lot in this episode. We're going to talk about why I switched brokerages. Yes, I switched brokerages. I left Valerie and I'm back at really my home brokerage of Sage right here in Toronto. And then last but not least, we are still going to be talking about the under-the-radar neighborhood stats that we cover every month in this podcast. But before we get into all that, we are still going to cover the market stats to keep you grounded in what's happening in Toronto and really give context to almost everything else we're going to talk about in this podcast. So let's jump right in. So I'm sure a lot of the other influencers you might follow online, on YouTube, on Instagram, TikTok, wherever, you've seen these stats, right? So these are the numbers now from August. Sales were still up year over year in August, 2.3%. So a modest increase of just over 100 extra units sold August this year versus August of 2024. Now, another theme that's been going, and it's continuing on as we even move into August, new listings were up 9% year over year, and active listings are still up double digits. We're seeing 22%. So market is still well supplied. That is then invariably putting downwards pressure on price, what we've been seeing month over month. None of this is news. If you've been following my podcast or others, prices are down 5% year over year due to really supply and demand. We have a lot of supply. Demand isn't there yet. So it really is still putting that downwards pressure on price. So that's what we're seeing. But some big numbers that stood out to me: detached house prices down 10% year over year. Semi-detached house prices also down 6.1%, with townhouses actually pretty much even, up 1%. Condos only down 2%. Now, these numbers stood out, but I want to provide some context, especially when it comes to detached house prices, right? So you look at those prices being down 10%. Doesn't necessarily mean that every detached house that hits the market, you can negotiate 10% off the asking price. Typically in August, and I really want to provide some context here, August numbers are really tough to look at, and from a standpoint of giving you any indication of what to expect as we move into the fall. August is a slow month, and it's a slow month in any market cycle, whether it's strong or weak. August is typically the month where whatever is selling in August is stuff that's kind of been left over from the spring or summer market, or generally there's sellers who need to sell at that given moment in time, whether they've already purchased something or they just need to sell for whatever reason it is. August generally doesn't really give you a clear picture of what to expect in the fall, because as it goes with most agents, and if you're following the market currently right now, you're seeing a lot of new listings hit the market this week, probably next week and subsequent weeks. If you have a really good listing and you are afforded the ability to wait, most sellers are going to wait till September to sell their property. So when we look at pricing being down 10% year over year, yeah, that is compared to last August, but I still wouldn't let that necessarily dictate what to expect over the next few weeks as we move into the fall market in terms of pricing, because August just really isn't a great month. So yeah, 10% lower over last August. It could also just be that maybe the product wasn't as good. And anecdotally, I'll tell you that. I mean, this past August, there wasn't a lot of great inventory that hit the market. I think most of the sellers with the cream of the crop listings were waiting until this month or later in the fall to list their properties. So we'll revisit that once the September numbers hit. Very early reading on the September market. There is a lot of new inventory hitting the market. I have one client who's looking at under the radar neighborhoods along with kind of West Toronto real estate. And we went from June and July when we were looking, maybe you'd have half a dozen listings hit the market in the areas she was looking at, to now, I mean, even just this week, I think I sent her 24 new listings that hit the market. So market is hitting up. There's a lot of inventory that's piling onto those active listings. So we're going to see what happens as we move forward into the fall. Now, as you know, if you follow this podcast, we like to look at under the radar stats. So two of the under the radar stats that we look at is sales to new listings ratio, and we like to look at months of inventory. So I'm going to pull that up right now for the city of Toronto, because it gives us some leading indicators of what to expect as we move into this fall, right? So sales to new listings ratio in the city of Toronto is sitting at about 34.5%. So only 34.5% of new listings that are hitting the market are selling. I've highlighted it right there. You can't really see because it's a black band, but it's there, 34.5. If we look at months of inventory, 4.7 months of inventory, right? So again, sales to new listings ratio, what it is the amount of new listings that hit the market in August. Only 34% of them sold. Months of inventory, if there were not another listing to hit the market, in the city of Toronto, it would take 4.7 months to sell that all off. Now, balanced market in Toronto for sales to new listings ratio is about 50%, and months of inventory is 2.5. So indications still show that we are still firmly in a buyer's market. Now that is the blanket statement across every neighborhood in the city of Toronto. That's an overall average. Condos obviously are pulling those averages down a little bit further into buyer's market territory. If we look at some neighborhoods in East Toronto or even a couple here in West Toronto, if you look through the stats right here, like East Toronto, there's a lot of neighborhoods approaching 50% sales to new listings ratio and below that 2.5 months of inventory, right? So you can't just take that number and blanket it across the city of Toronto. Even some under the radar neighborhoods are in the 40% range of sales to new listings ratio and around that 2.7 months of inventory. So yeah, as we're seeing, I mean, some of the trendier neighborhoods or the under the radar neighborhoods, which we'll get to later on in this podcast. If you're a buyer out there, we're either in a balanced market or you might even be in some sellers markets in some of the trendier neighborhoods, right? So just be prepared as we move into the fall that things might get a little tighter in those areas where there's still demand, right? Because it's really, we're talking about supply and demand. There's still a lot of demand in some of the more attractive neighborhoods in Toronto or some of the trendier pockets like the under the radar neighborhoods. Okay, so that's it for stats for now. We are going to come back to the stats in the under the radar neighborhoods later on in this podcast. As I said in the intro to this podcast, what we really want to get into is the story that really shook the summer, right? August hits. We all thought as realtors it was going to be like a normal August. We can take our vacations and not much is going to happen. And all of a sudden, mid-August, let me pull up the articles that kind of flooded everyone's feed. Here it is right here. iPro, right? I mean, we've all seen the news articles, right? I mean, I just typed in iPro into Apple News right here, and it is all over the place. So we all know what happened. Tens of millions of dollars effectively just vanished. 2,400 agents were displaced and shakily, weirdly moved to a new brokerage. A regulator asleep at the wheel, right? So That's a brief overview of really what happened, right? So $10.5 million shortfall in a trust account. 17 branches of iPro were closed. 2,400 agents were moved from iPro to this brand new brokerage called iCloud seemingly overnight. I think a part of this whole story that really stood out to a lot of us is that RECO, the Real Estate Council of Ontario, that's supposed to regulate realtors and brokerages, they actually found out about this in May, but didn't notify agents or the public until August. So how does that happen? How do they go months and sit quiet on this and allow the people who ran iPro to open up a new brokerage and move all their agents to this new brokerage? We're going to get to that in just one second. I think first what we need to do is go back to the basics and understand what a deposit is and what a trust account, right? So a deposit effectively just holds your property. So once you negotiate a deal, it's not like you're going to get the keys to your new home the day after the offer is accepted, right? So there is a closing period and a closing date that could be 2 weeks, a month, 6 months out. You place a deposit down that effectively holds the property until you close on that property, right? Until you get the keys, right? So as a seller, you feel a lot more comfortable holding a sum of money until closing to make sure that buyer just doesn't walk away or doesn't close on the property, right? So that's customary. Most people understand how that deposit works. Now that deposit, it goes into something called a trust account, right? So a trust account is where your money goes when you buy a home. So between when you've negotiated that deal, you've handed your wire transfer, well, they don't hand a wire transfer, you wire the money or you provide a bank draft to, in most cases, a brokerage to hold that money until closing. So it's a legal requirement in Ontario that any deposit money is held in a trust account because a trust account is supposed to be a very secure account that no one has access to. And there are very specific rules about how you can access that money. So it usually comes from directions from a lawyer on closing about how to disperse those funds from a trust account. Now, trust accounts are regulated under the Trust in Real Estate Services Act. It's funny that act is called Trust in Real Estate Services because, there's not a lot of trust in real estate services at the moment with the outcome of this iPro thing. But in theory, this money that's in a trust account is untouchable and it's supposed to be reconciled monthly and audited and reviewed by RECO. So RECO will go into brokerages and audit these trust accounts to ensure that there's no irregularities. So now, how is the supposed safest vault in the business? How is it showing cracks? How was a brokerage able to just have $10 million vanish? That's a question we still won't know yet until the OPP conducts their investigation, and hopefully we get that answer soon. Now, let's get into why the brokerages actually hold these deposits, right? Why doesn't it just go directly to the seller? Well, like we mentioned before, the trust account is a safer form of holding money. You're not just going to give $100,000 to a seller and say, please hold my money until you close, right? The trust account is a legal account where someone can't just kind of take the money and run. Now, in our market, brokerages typically hold that deposit money until closing. And it's customary to hold about 5% deposit that's paid to the listing brokerage in trust. So there's a practical reason why the brokerage brokerages hold that money. So number one is that it's far easier for the brokerage to hold the money because the other scenario where trust account could be used is with lawyers. Lawyers generally have trust accounts as well because they deal in real estate transactions. So a lawyer could hold that money as well until closing, but the brokerage creates a means where if a buyer and seller haven't retained legal representation yet, it makes it a little bit easier for them to at least get the deal done, right? Negotiate the sale of a property without having to retain a lawyer just yet, right? So if one side doesn't have a lawyer yet, it's easier for the brokerage to hold the money. They become a third party that holds the money until the buyer and the seller both retain legal counsel, and then at closing, that money gets dispersed. The other reason why brokerages are in the trust account business And the reason why it's 5% is that the brokerage then get to disperse that 5% as commissions, because that's generally what happens. And that's why listing brokerages hold the money. Typical in Ontario is that the seller pays out the commission on closing. So the seller's brokerage holds that 5%, where in most cases, half of that 5% goes to the listing brokerage and the other half goes to the buyer brokerage as commissions on closing. So brokerages are incentivized to have trust accounts and hold that money and not have to rely on a lawyer to disperse funds, because if the trust money was held by a lawyer's trust account, there could be a slight delay in getting those commissions paid out. So truthfully, that's one of the main reasons why brokerages hold those deposits, to ensure that everyone gets paid in an orderly fashion on closing. Well, agents get paid in an orderly fashion. So while this account was created for their protection, I mean, it's very clear that it's not solely for the consumer's protection. It's also for the protection of the brokerages to ensure they get paid. So ultimately, the public can ask, like, who's the trust account really serving? Is it the consumer or is it the commission check? I mean, it's really a 50-50 from my point of view. So we're going to get back to that in 1 second. Let's talk about how $10 million could go missing. So there's a lot of theories. There's the theory of sloppy bookkeeping, improper withdrawals, potential fraud, right? And a lot of people seem to be going down that road of potential fraud. There's also a lot of oversight gaps, right? I mean, the problem with this whole scenario is that RECO, a RECO audit only catches something after it happens, right? So in this case, they only found an issue after there was already $10 million missing, right? So there has to perhaps be, we'll get to what could change, but yeah, oversight is only happening after the fact, and that doesn't give the public a lot of confidence moving forward. Another thing is that RECO stayed silent for 3 months, right? They knew this $10 million was missing in May, but we only found out in August. So another question is, why weren't consumers and also us agents notified earlier, right? I mean, there's some agents, luckily not myself, that have done deals with iPro agents. Even some iPro agents who are relying on their commission money won't have access to that money now, right? Until they apply for insurance claims and so on and so forth, right? I mean, let's say if this was just a regular bank account, you would expect that regulators would be at your door the first day they found out that something was amiss, something was missing. So why was real estate different? Why did they wait those 3 months? I mean, again, a lot of questions, not a lot of answers just yet until this criminal investigation is complete. So with that, there's a lot of public trust that was eroded. And really the biggest question now is oversight. So, if RECO can allow agents to move shops while there's $10 million outstanding, how can the public really trust this system? Right? So consumers were already really skeptical of real estate agents, right? And this really reinforces a lot of the negative stereotypes that exist in real estate and around realtors, right? Now, most realtors are just as angry as the public, right? A lot of us fight tooth and nail to ensure that we're upholding the rules, and and most of us are legitimately small businesses, entrepreneurs that are trying to do best for our clients. So when stuff like this happens, it creates another speed bump in terms of us trying to show that we are legitimate entrepreneurs and business people who have the interests of our clients as the highest priority. Now, another thing that could come out of this is that if there's ever deposits over $200,000, there's going to be a really tough time for clients to be able to just hand over $200,000 to a brokerage to hold, because, and I'll pull it up here on the screen, there is insurance on consumer deposits, thankfully, but that insurance is only up to $200,000 per claim, right? So if you had a deposit that was larger than $200,000, you're in for a fight or likely some type of legal challenge to be able to get some of that money because there is money missing. So if there's ever a scenario where you have to put a deposit that's larger than $200,000, I think in most of those cases, it'll likely be as a subsequent deposit that gets held by that person's lawyer, right? So let's say if you're putting up a $250,000 to $300,000 deposit, it's really going to be tough to ask that person to leave that money with a brokerage when it's only protected up to $200,000. But ultimately, what's going to come out of all this, and we're already hearing a lot of pushes and a lot of screaming for it, is that real estate needs independent oversight and it can't be self-regulated. It's actually pretty wild that we allowed us as realtors, to self-regulate ourselves, right? If we look at Quebec, we look at BC, they have the ombudsman of those provinces that oversees their real estate associations. And it's shocking that they allowed realtors in Ontario to have self-regulation. And I think it's about time that we have a third party like an ombudsman who actually oversees realtors to ensure that the public is protected. And also as realtors, we protect ourselves from ourselves so that another scenario like an iPro doesn't happen. Not to say that it won't happen even with an ombudsman, but it probably would happen a lot less, and there would likely be stiffer penalties for things like this to happen. And I mean, it's really not just about that one brokerage iPro, it's about all of us, right? So how did we get here? How did we let this get to this point? And this is something that's going to be controversial, and maybe some of my colleagues won't like hearing this, but real estate unfortunately attracts a lot of grifters, a lot of people just chasing fast money, right? In real estate, and one thing that has become a lot more prevalent, something that I really don't really like, is a lot of these pyramid schemes that are popping up at the brokerage level, right? This recruitment-based model of real estate. So to give you a quick primer, if you don't understand how this works, there's a lot of new brokerages that are popping up, especially a lot of these new tech-forward brokerages. They call themselves cloud brokerages. They don't really have physical offices, or if they do, it's a small little office. And they really profit off of recruiting a ton of agents, right? So these brokerages really only make money off of having as many agents signed up under their brokerage as possible. And what they offer agents who are already there is this pyramid, right? Where if those agents recruit more agents to the business, they get to make money off of the agents they've recruited. So effectively what you create and there's some agents who already do this, they don't sell real estate and they simply just recruit for their brokerages because they get to earn off of every agent that's recruited off their earnings. And then there's a pyramid, because if an agent they recruit, let's say they make $2,000 per year off the agent they recruited, then if that agent then recruits someone else, they also get a piece of the pie and the pyramid goes down from there, right? So they incentivize agents just simply to recruit and not to actually sell real estate. I mean, it sounds wild, right? So this has then led to are these big real estate teams that are effectively just lead farms, right? So these agents recruit new agents. Those new agents that join these teams, they just need real estate leads, right? So they train these agents to process these lists of emails and phone numbers just to try to get deals coming through the system. It doesn't matter. And it just becomes a numbers game, right? You're not training these new agents to actually educate their clients or advise their clients, right? So all these people are brought in. You're just trained to process leads, not to necessarily serve your clients. So it's led to a system whereas, for example, like in Ontario, we have 100,000 real estate agents. Over 100,000 real estate agents. So like rough numbers, that's pretty much one agent for every 100 to 120 adults in Ontario, which is absolutely wild, right? To put that into perspective, let me check right now to see doctors, for example. Number of doctors in Ontario. So right now in Ontario, we have 31,500, around 31,000, let's say, doctors in Ontario, right? So 31,000 doctors and 100,000 agents. Which profession is more important and more needed in Ontario? I'm not going to answer that question. Most of you are probably already screaming at your screen. We know what the answer is, right? So there's some structural issues in Ontario with just adding more agents to the pipelines, right? So not only do brokerages benefit, a lot of the real estate boards like the Toronto Real Estate Board and other real estate boards across the province profit by having more agents paying fees, and that's how they run their business, right? So basically, we have too many people eating at the table, but no one's really teaching all these people how to cook. So we have literally the saying of too many cooks in the kitchen. And that has to change as well, right? So which then gets me to the training problem we have in Ontario. So if we have brokerages and real estate boards that are really just incentivized just to add more agents to their pipeline because it helps their bottom line, they don't necessarily care about the clients in the end. So you're adding all of these new agents to this pipeline, which benefits only brokerages and real estate boards. And these new agents get often little to no mentorship. So brokerages, they just focus on marketing scripts and not fiduciary duties. And real estate boards just focus on, again, attracting more agents to get more agents to sign up to become realtors because they only care about collecting their fees. Right? So an analogy would be this. Let's say you went to a hospital with a broken arm and you went to an ER, and that ER doctor had no residency and they just went to med school, they read a few books, and now they're going to try and set the bone in your arm and give you a cast. Would you trust that doctor? Or let's say you got fired from work and you retained a lawyer, and your lawyer has actually never seen a courtroom before, right? And they're supposed to fight on your behalf for your wrongful dismissal lawsuit. Would you trust that lawyer? Right? I know all the answers are likely no, right? But the problem is that's what we're seeing in real estate. So agents getting the real estate license, going to college, getting the real estate license, but have no practical experience, and then they're expected to negotiate multi-million-dollar deals with no requirement to actually learn how to do the business. Right? So personal anecdote, right? I mean, when I was in my early 20s working retail, I was an assistant manager at Champ Sports, selling sneakers. When I would hire a new part-time employee to sell sneakers, I would not let them on the floor to try and sell sneakers without them shadowing one of the more experienced salespeople. Why? Because I want them to learn the rules on how we did things at Champ Sports to sell sneakers. Right? So even we understood at a very basic level in retail that you wouldn't just throw someone into the fire and just let them go on without reading a pamphlet and learning how to sell sneakers. So if we demand that level of training to sell sneakers, why do we not enforce that type of training for selling multi-million-dollar homes? That's the business we're in. When we keep adding all these new agents to the pipeline without training, it's all these people negotiating on the client's behalf who are supposed to be acting in the client's best interest, but have zero training. So ultimately, to close off this section, because it's gone on pretty long already, iPro isn't really an outlier. There could potentially be more scenarios like iPro. So it's really a symptom of the problem. I mean, what we really need in this province is we need fewer but better trained agents, right? And get rid of this model where we have these brokerages who just profit off having as many agents as possible. I'm not here to speak on iPro's business, but 2,400 agents is a lot, right? There's no way that a broker, the people who are running iPro, brokers, managers, there's only so many of them, are able to provide training to 2,400 salespeople. It's impossible. Or provide them support. It's impossible, right? So we have these models where these brokerages are just incentivized to bring in as many people as possible, and then these kinds of things happen. So what I think what we need to have is mandatory mentorship. It should be an industry standard, right? And it should be something that's written into the law that when a brokerage comes on, a new agent has to shadow or be part of a team or be partnered up with an experienced agent for X amount of weeks, months, maybe even years before they're actually able to sell real estate. And then oversight has to be external and not self-regulated. We already talked about that. And I think there's already a push, and that's likely going to happen. And ultimately, consumers deserve professionals and not grifters. We have to really look into these pyramid scheme models and brokerages and look at it with a closer, discerning eye, because I don't know if it's necessarily in the consumer's best interest to have that model exist. I mean, I'm not saying regulate it out completely, but we have to look at it and see, is it really helping consumers? So while the industry spun out into chaos over the summer, I had some other news. I mean, I actually switched brokerages. This podcast is really just supposed to be stats and me changing brokerage, but obviously I had to touch on the iPro thing. So yes, I switched brokerages, and it wasn't because of what happened with iPro, although it was kind of awkward because the day I switched brokerages was the day all this iPro stuff came out. And I mean, I didn't plan it that way. I mean, I had no idea. None of us knew all this iPro stuff was going to come out, but it just so happened the day that I switched brokerages, literally I switched brokerages, and as I'm driving back from handing in my resignation letter, I'm just seeing my social media feed and text messages going off about iPro. So iPro thing, just to put it out there, had nothing to do with me switching brokerages. So, and there was no negativity with Valerie where I came from. It was just something that I had to do. So let me talk about my transition. It's kind of an awkward transition talking about iPro, not talking about this, had nothing to do with one another. So let's talk first about Valerie. Why I decided to go to Valerie in the first place was it was an exciting experiment, right? The vision was they were a tech-first AI-driven brokerage, the first AI brokerage in Canada, which was pretty cool, right? I mean, I'm a tech-forward person, so I jumped on the opportunity to jump into that arena. I thought that, hey, this would be really, really cool. So I even made a video about it. I'll say it. I mean, the Sage guys weren't too happy about the video, but we made up. It was all good in the end. I made a video moving from a traditional brokerage to an AI brokerage, and there was a lot of optimism at the time when they made that video, right? I thought, like, this is really the way of the future, and this is where things are headed. This is where things are moving, right? So there's a lot of positives about that move when I moved from Sage to Valerie originally. It was innovative thinking. They were future oriented, and there's a lot of that new entrepreneurial energy, right? So I think at that point in time, maybe I just needed that. I needed to kind of see what that looked like. But there's a catch to that, right? Sometimes disruption looks good on paper, but it doesn't necessarily land clean in real life for everybody, right? So startups can carry challenges, right? I mean, the first one that I found was at perception, right? So a lot of my clients didn't really understand the move, right? They're like, okay, you're going from an established midtown brokerage. You sell real estate primarily in downtown, midtown Toronto, and now you're moving to a brokerage that's based in Vaughan, that's AI. I don't really get it, right? So there was a lot of obstacles I had to overcome in terms of just perception with my own clients and even with other colleagues in the industry, right? They would always question, like, oh, you made that move from Sage to Valerie, why? And there was a lot of that kind of questions, and that came up constantly, right? So what I found is that, like, authority in real estate is fragile, especially for an established agent like myself, right? And perception, unfortunately, in our industry matters just as much as execution, right? There's a reason why a lot of realtors drive nice cars and dress nicely and we have to put out that perception that we are doing well, right? So the public can trust us. And then when we think about, like, perception, right? And new things that come versus kind of the old traditional model, right? I think there's something to be said about tradition within certain industries, right? So while I made that video that I moved from an AI brokerage to a traditional brokerage, I then found that actually I do need that more traditional brokerage for my own personal business, right? So let me, like, put this into some analogies, right? So if we think of cars, for example, think of the company Fisker. Fisker made a lot of cool electric cars, right? Cool design, or even Tesla, right? Cool design, really cool forward-thinking cars. But if we look at, like, the leader in automobiles, it's still Toyota and Lexus, right? And why do Toyota and Lexus carry weight? Well, they're really, really well-made cars. They're reliable, right? So there's a huge trust factor there, right? People trust a Toyota and Lexus just to work. They may not have the coolest tech. They may not be the coolest designs, but when you drive a Toyota or a Lexus, that thing will drive for 1,000,000 kilometers and you won't have any issues with it. Or if you look at like jewelry, for example, right? I mean, we see all these new cool jewelry places pop up, like Oak and Luna as an example, right? Trendy, I get spammed by their stuff on Instagram. If you were to compare that to like Tiffany's, Tiffany's is timeless and reliable. When you see that blue box pop up, it doesn't matter what's inside of it, right? People trust it. Whatever's inside that little blue box with the white ribbon, you trust it, right? Doesn't even matter what's inside. You just trust that that's going to be high quality, right? Or actually, I have a recent example. Just recently, we had a bottle of wine from Two Sisters, great winery out in Niagara region. So I could buy a bottle of wine from the LCBO and open it up, and if it tastes kind of crap, there's not really much I can do about it, right? It just tastes like crap. I have to either drink it or pour it down the drain. But with Two Sisters, I bought a bottle of wine and the cork was a little messed up. We opened it up, we took a sip, and I'm like, oh, this kind of like acrid, a little vinegary tasting. We emailed Two Sisters without even a flinch. No, they barely asked any questions. They asked, what bottle was it? When was it made? What's the serial number? And we're like, this was it. And they said, no problem. We're going to send you a brand new bottle of wine without anything. They were just going to send, they believed in their brand and they wanted to, and they've been around for long enough and they understood that service trust was paramount for them. They just sent us a new bottle, right? I wasn't going to get that with just a random bottle of wine at the LCBO. So really the lesson in all this was lasting brands survive on service, trust, and consistency. And it's really tough. So while new entrants can do everything they can to really build up that first thing, service, trust and consistency is a lot harder to do, and it's a long road. So the secret is that trust and consistency will always outweigh hype, right? People can offer similar services, but trust and consistency is harder to do, and it takes a lot of time to build that. So I switched from Valerie. I kind of went back to the traditional model. So I almost kind of feel like it's like the Matrix, right? I was blue pill at Valerie, and it was interesting, experimental, but sometimes you got to take that red pill and go back to reality. And for me, it was stepping back into Sage wasn't just about nostalgia. I mean, there was some of that and some familiarity, but it was about kind of grounding myself in a place where trust is built in already and not questioned, right? So if you're outside of Toronto, you might not understand what Sage is, but if you're a certain type of buyer in a certain demographic, young professional that wants to buy or sell real estate in the midtown, downtown Toronto, you understand Sage, right? It's been around for 20 plus years, and a lot of the agents that work there have built up this trust and perception within the business. So really for myself and where my business is at right now, I needed that reliability of trust and tradition because I think it would help my business. And so Sage is really kind of just like that step back to that. And some more context to that is that, I mean, it was already at Sage for 6+ years before I switched to Valerie. I already knew their systems and their culture. And another big one for me is that a lot of my close relationships in real estate were already at Sage. A lot of my friends in the industry were already there. A lot of the people that were at Sage, there's a lot of agents who were at Sage who were at my brokerage prior to Sage, PSR, that also switched to Sage 6+ years ago. So there was a lot of familiarity there. But I have nothing but good things to say about the Valerie guys, especially Shamir and Dan Fote. I mean, young guys, smart, innovative leaders. I think they're really going to figure things out at Valerie longer term. But I think for me, where I was at my point in my career, I just really need to go back to that tradition and trust. That's where I was at. So I think Valerie's story isn't over, and I think there's smart people there that are going to figure things out. I just didn't have the patience for it, I'll be honest. I didn't have patience for the startup culture. I'm in my early 40s. Hopefully I get to retire in 10 to 15 years. So that's why I made the move. And I think my clients are going to be better served by kind of that more traditional brokerage model, at least in the short term. Also, I get my Toronto address back. 2010 Yonge Street is where Sage is located. I can walk to the brokerage in 20 minutes, which is nice. They also have the traditional sports structure. The other cool thing is I'm a smallish fish in a big pond. There's a lot of very high producers at Sage. So I'm in rooms with people who eclipse my production. So I get to learn a lot from them, learn what they do, and kind of some of their more room to collaborate and sharpen my own skills. Really, that's really what it is. So we're already 45 minutes into this podcast. I don't want to stretch it out too much longer, but those of you who are here for the under the radar stats, we are going to jump into that right now, right? So if you get back to the idea of like trust and consistency and so on, really, I mean, if you followed my channel, I've really built the identity of my channel around Eglinton West and the city of York. I'm one of the few realtors who actually really believes in this area long term, not just chasing trends. So I really want to make sure that I continue that, and let's jump into those stats for those neighborhoods, right? So I'm going to try to do this quickly. I don't want to make this an hour plus long podcast. So if we look at the numbers for Oakwood Village, number 1, and we compare it to the average in the city of Toronto, if you follow this podcast, we always talk about these numbers, that Oakwood Village average sale price is higher than the overall average in the city of Toronto. But Oakwood Village is not about comparing it to the overall average in the city of Toronto. If you know what we talk about on this channel, you know what we compare this to, and it's not to the overall average in the city of Toronto. We are comparing this to the neighborhoods around it, right? So if we look at average price in Oakwood at 1.215 million, let's say, compare that to Humewood at almost 1.5 million, right? Humewood and Oakwood are right next to one another, right? You're getting a $200,000 discount by moving a few hundred meters west, right? If we compare that to Forest Hill South, which is just to the north of Oakwood, average sale price $3 million versus $1.2 million. You can get some similar type product in Oakwood Village, right? So that's why that Oakwood Village is an under the radar neighborhood. It's under the radar for luxury product. You can get entry-level luxury product in Oakwood Village right now and save a ton of money, especially when you're comparing it to places like Forest Hill South, which is just to the north. Now, let's go to the other under-the-radar neighborhoods. And we're going to compare those directly to the city of Toronto numbers, because that you're going to see some real value in some of these under-the-radar neighborhoods when you're comparing it to the city of Toronto. So the first one we're going to compare it to is Fairbank. Now, Fairbank, these numbers are starting to creep up. I've been telling people about Fairbank for a long time. Fairbank is one of my favorite. If we did power rankings of neighborhoods in Toronto, Fairbank is, I actually have a tie. I'm going to be honest. Fairbank and Briar Hill are tied for number 1. Fairbank, though, if you want a detached house at a good price, so when we look at this average in Fairbank of just over $1 million, those are mostly detached houses that are selling. So you can get a house in Caledonia Fairbank for just over $1 million, whereas the average sold price in Toronto, which includes condos and townhouses and all these other house types, is $1.1 million. Right? That's a really good number for if you were looking for a detached or even a semi-detached house in Toronto. Right? Just over $1 million. Some really good value there. Now, if we look a little bit further west over in Keelsdale, $900,000 average sale price versus 1.1 million average in the city of Toronto. That's significant savings, right? And Keelsdale, I can't talk about enough. I mean, the amount of development that's coming to Keelsdale is wow. Well over 10,000 new units coming. 3 subway stations, including a massive transit hub over at Mount Dennis, which is at the western edge of Keelsdale, right? Where you can jump on the Up Express and be downtown in 15 minutes. You can go up to Pearson, right? You can get to every corner of the city via transit from that location at Mount Dennis. And not only that, you have 3 of the new LRT stations that I hope open up in 2025. I don't want to make this podcast about that, but anyway, it will open. All the stations are open. They're ready to go. As soon as the government decides to open those stations, we're ready to go in Keelsdale. And there's 3 of those stations in Keelsdale. And then for the last under the radar neighborhood, Briar Hill. Briar Hill, super biased. I live in Briar Hill. I think it is ridiculously under the radar. And the average sale price of Briar Hill is $881,000 in August. $881,000 versus an average in Toronto of 1.1 million. Now, Briar Hill, there's a lot more condos in Briar Hill, so that brings kind of the average price down a little bit. Condos, townhouses. But the cool thing about Briar Hill is we have every single house type in Briar Hill. If you want a condo, we have it. If you want a townhouse, we have it. If you want a condo townhouse, we have it. If you want a triplex, we have it. If you want a multiplex, if you want lofts, we have lofts. We have standard condos. We have detached houses. We have brand new build detached houses. We have brand new semi-detached. We have old semi-detached. We have every single house type other than link houses, which you only find in the suburbs. Any type of house that you want to buy, you can get it in Briar Hill. Which means we have almost every single price point in Briar Hill, which is amazing, right? And in Briar Hill, you don't have to wait on the LRT. Great thing with Briar Hill, we already have we have 2 subway stations, traditional old subway stations in Briar Hill. And not only that, Briar Hill, we sit literally on the edge of Forest Hill South. So Forest Hill South I can see Forest Hill from my window. It's right there. So you can access all of the amenities of Forest Hill and live in Briar Hill. I've said it a million times on this channel. Briar Hill is ridiculously under the radar and great family neighborhood. Right? Great family neighborhood, quiet streets, parks, access to tons of amenities. Allen Road, you can get anywhere you want in the city via transit or driving, whatever you need to do, right? This pocket of the city is so undervalued and under the radar. It really is the Brooklyn of Toronto, right? I've said it over and over and over and over again. And some people are starting to catch on, right? I mean, as we've already seen, Fairbank is starting to happen in Fairbank, right? Values are moving upwards in Fairbank. Keelsdale and Briar Hill are next. It's coming down the pipeline. Okay. So that's it for the podcast. You're going to see on this channel, if I don't know if you've seen the main page of this channel already, there's going to be a lot more, we're going to be a lot more hyper-focused on what type of content we're putting out on this channel. As you've seen from a lot of my videos recently, a lot of my focus is on families living and staying in the city, because I really believe Toronto is a city for families. I want more family. I have clients right now. A lot of clients are moving from the suburbs, moving back to the city because they see the value of being in Toronto, especially when you're raising not just little babies, but older kids, right? If you have teenagers. And actually, let me talk about some of the videos that I have coming up, right? Then my next video after this podcast is going to be about raising teens in Toronto and what type of real estate you want to look for when you have a teen. Right? Being in the city with a teen is very advantageous, right? It gives your teens certain levels of freedom that they may not be able to experience in the suburbs, right? Because, I mean, I have teen boys and they don't even need to drive, right? They can just access transit and be everywhere they want in the city. You have great schools and tons of cool amenities in terms of like jobs and camps and all this kind of cool stuff that they can do right here in the city. I'm also going to be talking a lot more about neighborhoods for young athletes and young hoopers. And really going to be talking about why families can live in townhouses and condos, right? You just think family life, it has to be in a big detached house in the suburbs. No. There's other house types that can accommodate families. So we talk about that on my channel already. It's really going to be a lot more hyper-focused on that, along with the under-the-radar neighborhoods. So, I mean, I've planted my flag in this. I have a family. I live in a loft in the city of Toronto. And there are many others of you who can live this same lifestyle. Living in the city of Toronto, you don't need to live in a 5,000 square foot house. We can make it happen in Toronto and in a lot of the under the radar neighborhoods. Because, I mean, Toronto's going to stay a city for families. And for it to stay a city of families, it's really going to start in a lot of these overlooked under the radar neighborhoods. But yeah, we've talked a lot on this channel. We talked about iPro. We've talked about grifters and pyramid schemes and why I went back to a traditional brokerage. But at the end of the day, it all comes back down to trust, right? Trust in your agent. I mean, trust in your community and trust the place where you're putting your money. And your family's future will be solid when you trust in all of that, right? So I've planted my flag in Toronto. Eglinton West, City of York, because I believe it's one of the last true places in Toronto where families can still afford to plant their flags and plant their trees, right? So that's where my focus is going to stay. That's where it's going, helping families navigate real estate in this city, not just with data, but with stories and perspective, right? So you'll see it in the videos I've got coming, right? So if you want surface level headlines, there's a lot of people who will deliver that. You're not going to find surface level headlines here, right? You're going to find the truth, and you're going to find under the radar insights right here that matter to families, right? So stick with me, right? So share this episode, subscribe to the channel, and let's keep building something real in this business, right? There's enough grifters, enough people selling you a whole bunch of like nonsense, right? There's a lot in this business that feels fake, and you're not going to get the fake here. You're going to get the real, because Toronto needs more than just housing. It needs more honesty. And that's what I'm here for. Under the radar isn't just a brand. It's a promise. Peace out.